Hi everyone, welcome back to my studio. I'm Gary Tucker and this is Advancing with Watercolor. Today we're going to take on a new challenge of painting a rainy day scene. We're going to do this using a photograph that shows a flat gray day, typical to the weather we're having today, and we're going to exaggerate some of the qualities that we see in a rainy day scene. To start, we're going to practice a drill on figures. How to build figures with a pencil, how to build them with a brush, what sort of things to look for as you're building your figures. We're going to incorporate all this into an atmosphere that combines the excitement of going to the ballpark for the first time. So I hope you're as excited as I am to paint the stadium from the outside. I want you to grab your team's hat, put it on, and move over to your watercolor table, where we're going to start with a drill on figures. The first part I'm drawing is the small pub that is part of Fenway Park, Lansdowne Street, that area. This is the Cask and Flagon. It's been there as long as I can recall. And lots of billboards around here, which are visually quite interesting. There's a little awning below that too. And the park itself is sort of built on a hill. So there's a lot of ups and downs in this area. And Fenway Park goes down like this. Let me push this back a little bit. We have the Prudential, we have a light coming up about here. I have another light here. And we have these interesting pieces of architecture. Bring this a little closer to this side. About here. Start to indicate some of those figures. Awnings. Sidewalk. Crosswalk. All the complication is above. Down below, it's just going to be some reflections. Small figures here, perhaps having a beer before the game, outside. We'll start to place some figures. grouping here, and a grouping here. Lots of figures. We'll leave a little space through here for our main figures. Stadium lights, billboard. Let's clean it up and see how it looks. Oh, and we do see, I'm going to show the Prudential back here. So I'm really crowding this upper section, aren't I? Lots going on up here. Well, if you look at the photo, there's even more that I'm showing. And a nice natural center of interest through here. Again, more figures. Let's put our center of interest. Doing a rainy day. We need some figures with umbrellas. A little grouping here with umbrellas. Rain is passing, of course. It's not going to stay there long. How about family going to the ball game? That seems like a good theme for today. All right, this is little Gary. He's kind of excited because it's his first ball game. He's going, come on, let's go. So already my storytelling side is starting to develop figures that tell a story. I'm going to leave a little more space around the family. This is another strategy, but remember we're kind of isolating them from the crowd. So here's the baseball sages, as I like to call them, those who have statistics running through their brains all the time, can quote the statistics of any major player. Reflections, lots of reflections through here. Some space. This is how we create our center of interest. Okay. So these figures are just a little closer. You can see a few more details. These figures are a little far away. I think we're pretty close. I think I will do some lettering, though I'm not sure how realistic I want to make it. More figures. We could show them coming home from the game or going, let's have them going to the game. If they're coming towards us, then it's a little more like I want to show sort of a movement. The game is not yet started. Put this a little further over here. It's a complex subject, so naturally it's going to take a little longer to place it. Looking for some interesting shapes. I think I've got a pretty good collection of shapes here. Okay, most of the drawing in my center of interest. The periphery does have some elements of the stadium, not a lot really. How would you know this is Fenway Park? I guess if you know the cask and flagon, you would know. If you know some of the elements, you would know. If you're a baseball fan, you would know. But not a lot to really signal this is Fenway Park. Okay, let's go forward with our first wash. We're starting off our work with a very light wash. We want to paint the background to this image, which is Fenway Park. And I've taken from the photograph, you could see in the drawing that I was referring to the shapes and placement of various parts of Fenway Park, and I'm following that as an important part of the design because I want to show my interest in that shape. There's a lot of ins and outs, a lot of parts of the structure that I feel are visually appealing. One of them is the scale, the other is the various girders and rising lights, billboards, things of that nature that create an interesting shape against the sky. And that's an important part of this design for me, so I'm taking care around the edges to build up that sort of silhouetted shape. I am using a very light application here. The idea is to keep it, to start off the painting with a wet wash and add a little pigment to the wash so that I can get a graded effect. And in essence, what I want to do is create a luminous area behind my figures, which are the main subject. And I want to create a graded wash to do that because that helps to create a feeling of atmosphere. Could be bouncing light, it could be mist rising off the sidewalk. In any case, it does create a bit of atmosphere, and that atmosphere I feel will be helpful in creating the effect of a rainy day. So while this wash is wet, you see me working into it now with a little darker version of the same
neutral tint color, and building up some of the angular strokes, very attentive to the edges, the things that meet the sky, the edges that meet the sky, and create this silhouetted effect of Fenway Park. And then I stopped short, a couple inches short of the stage or the sloping ground that rises to meet Fenway Park. This is where I'm going to be placing the figures. So naturally, I want to keep it rather luminous behind the figures. And the fact that I'm using gravity to pull down the wash and the combination of light and dark gradually changing against the background gives me the luminous feeling that I would like to have in the background. Very passive, but at the same time, some interesting shapes to uh, give us an impression of the structure that's behind all this. And this is one part of the one piece of the puzzle. With watercolor, we're learning how to compartmentalize, how to break up our image into manageable sections, and working primarily in the background, the foreground, and staging areas, all very dry right now. So we're just managing this one part that makes the painting of it a little easier. I think this sort of painting is a little bit of a departure because we're moving in a direction away from our resource image. We're using parts of it. We're using our view of Fenway Park, certainly, but we're engaging our imagination quite a bit, our memory and our uh, sense of a rainy day. What can we include to make this feel more like a rainy day or like rain has just passed and they're moving into the stadium? Things that help me to realize that image have come about slowly. Sometimes it's obvious, like a reflection of an object. And we're going to do that towards the end of the painting, but reflections can really give us a sense that a surface is wet. We know that, and we can make use of that in this painting. In fact, it is one reason that I considered making this foreground area so large. If you look at the resource photograph, the ground level is much lower in the related to the stadium, but I'm putting it up high in this painting so that I can exaggerate those reflections. The stadium itself won't be reflected. It's far enough away that we're not going to see much of a reflection from the stadium, but rather concentrate on the reflections of our figures. Now you see me building in the foreground wash. And again, it's a graded wash, very light near the top of the hill where the figures are going to be walking back and forth. And as it comes closer to us, adding more pigment and trying to get a strong graded quality to this. To help me, I'm using a big a big squirrel mop brush. And this is good because it carries a lot of liquid to the page, so this is quite a large area to manage, but using the big brush helps me to manage this area. The goal for me is to make it as gradual a transition to a dark bottom as I can. And while this is, while I'm moving across dry paper now, I'm creating the walkway, that skinny zebra pattern that uh, we see in crosswalks. This one is going laterally, so it's highly foreshortened, but it'll serve as sort of a sort of a walking, well, let's call it a crosswalk. It'll serve as the crosswalk for our figures. Now I'm taking advantage of this wet area, and I'm going to start to um, build up that darker aspect to the graded wash. From the bottom up, carrying more pigment, more dark to the graded wash. And the goal again is to get some drama to the scene. That drama is created largely by these graded washes. Whether they're soft edged, well, some of them have a soft edge to them. This area you see me working on now is going to be the reflection of the Cask and Flagon, which is a local pub, and they're right across the street from Fenway Park, so you can imagine how busy it gets, and at least when we're not battling COVID as we are this year. It gets quite busy, and it's a interesting shape for me too. I'm talking about it as if it's not a pub, but it represents a shape primarily for me, an interesting shape to juxtapose against the background. And I'll take the basic qualities of this shape when I'm building it and exaggerate them somewhat. That includes awnings, some signage, a billboard behind. So all these things, I have to say, the primary interest for me is shape. I'm sure after I'm finished painting, I'll want to go have a beer at the pub and enjoy it on another level. But when we're painting it, or when we're sketching it, or first attracted, let's say when we're first attracted to the motif, I think it's because of the interesting shape. So I'm doing something that's a little unusual, which is to paint the reflection first. Typically, we will paint our subject and then we will reflect it so we can line up things, etc. We can do the same in reverse and basically line it up with our drawing, what we can see above. The reason I'm painting it early is because I want to take advantage of the wet nature of the paper. So I started at the top edge where it's dry paper, and it's actually going to be a little bit of a sidewalk there. And then I start to apply a very strong dark and let gravity do the rest. And then I continue now up above where it's dried off, and I can place some figures. Sometimes the paper's semi-wet, and this is a good condition too because you can get some lost and found edges. But the area where I place the figures right now is dry. That gives me some control. And then you see I'm exercising that idea of a group, joining the bodies, placing torsos, and creating reflections. I'll add some heads at some point to give a little feeling of animation, an umbrella, this and that. These are very distant figures, and so are very small in the painting and are going to be sort of like a chorus. They're not major figures. And that sensation of a rainy day created by these graded washes, these first 3 graded washes, is getting quite good. And you see how it's isolating sort of a area for our stage. And now, as it dries, I may need to adjust it. That means that the pigment is pale, then I need to restate it. I may need to do that in the end, towards the end of the painting. But right now, we're painting a important area, which are the underside of awnings and the awnings themselves. We're painting around the awnings, so the awnings are created as a result of our painting the darks around, and building up some really strong darks underneath. This area is going to basically frame our subject, but I do start with a good amount of detail and precision, and as it develops, we'll forfeit some areas, I'll lose some areas, and wash away some areas, but I do start with a sort of a very strong, hard-edged realization of the subject. And I'm using the smaller brush, a smaller sablette, to build up this structure. It's a small area working on dry paper, so I can be very positive with the brushwork, knowing that I'm not going to change much of the brushwork. Just build up the feeling of the awnings that were there in the drawing, and if some figures moving into the scene, some indication of the signage above. How much on that I'll play, I don't know at this point. And this is another good example of compartmentalizing the painting, working in a manageable section until it's relatively finished, and then I feel I can move on, and then move on to another manageable section rather than try to do too much at once. And this all comes about through thinking about a watercolor plan before we start. Anyway, you can kind of see how the initial inspiration is coming from the photograph or the location, but we are able to really bring our imagination into play as a major resource for this or for any painting, really. The idea of a rainy day, standing and painting in plein air on a rainy day, we can do it, but it's almost never a pleasurable experience because our paper just never dries and we can't get the sort of firm edges that we need. So um, conjuring up the idea of a rainy day or looking at some reference material that refers to a rainy day, we can get some ideas that are usable. But in this case, a lot of it is born out of memory and imagination. And I'm hoping this week that you take the chance to do something of this with your own subject, is to take your a subject, and it might be a dry day or a cloudy day. Cloudy days are best because everything is flat anyway, and we can create this sort of extension of our image more easily. In fact, on cloudy days, these days excite me just as much as sunny days because they they allow for this sort of interpretation of a rainy day subject. And I like the quality when I have a chance to build a painting based on a rainy day. I really like it because I can use so much of this wet on wet work and create a dramatic piece. Well, it's starting to come to life, isn't it? We're starting to see the feeling of wetness throughout the scene. This is basically an extension of the shape below in the form of a billboard that rises up above. In this particular location, we see a lot of this. The area of the Fenway Park, of course, is just loaded with advertisements. And the way that these show themselves against the sky at different perspectives and with different configurations is visually very appealing. And so naturally, I'm exaggerating that. You can see it in the reference photo, but not with the height and the sort of energy that I'm giving it. Truly, this is an extension of what we're seeing based on, well, extended to make the effect a little more dramatic and a little more interesting, visually appealing. And I really encourage you to make this a part of your regular uh, working habit where you'll take a scene and improvise on it, perhaps doing a rainy day scene or a early morning scene, or the sort of scene where you have to either exaggerate what you're seeing or improvise on what you're seeing in a way that you can create something related but at the same time very different, and really engage your imagination and your memory in this way. Okay, well, we've got some, this upper section is dried to the point where we can start to add our figures. Naturally, I've moved to a smaller brush and I'm able to see the position of the figures that I created through the drawing. And these figures are also going to be a group. It's a good place to start off because you can make mistakes in these peripheral figures and still end up with a really good painting. If you make a mistake with your central figures, that's harder to recover from. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm adding a few umbrellas, grouping my figures. I think I call this group the baseball sages because there's always a group of older guys who know every statistic that's imaginable about baseball, and they tend to congregate and joust back and forth, kind of testing their knowledge and making predictions, and very opinionated bunch, but they're very fun to watch because they're so animated. Anyway, the, I don't know how that came out, but it's the way my mind works is I give these silhouettes, these kind of figures with no real personality. I start to imagine them as being people, and who would they be? What would they be doing here? How would they be moving through this scene? Oftentimes that happens even without the drawing. I start to see something in the painting and I follow it to its conclusion. And along the way, I get these little stories happening, and it makes the painting experience more enjoyable because I can focus on characteristics of figures that I might not focus on otherwise. Using that really small sablette brush now, and I've gone quite dark with the pigment. This is an example of painting the center of interest. So I'm using two things here. Well, maybe three. Two major things. I'm using much darker pigment to paint these figures, and I'm giving them hard edges, painting on dry paper, using hard edges to grab our attention, to have the audience really stop here and see what's going on. I'm also making the figures a little closer. That means a little larger in scale. And we're starting to get that sort of quality of a busy scene. Our major figures are walking through that busy scene. They're a little isolated, especially Junior there, who's got his arms outstretched, isolated from the scene. And so we can see them clearly from the very moment we see this painting, they're probably the first things that we see. And I want to give them sort of a story, a little bit of a story. The family is going to the baseball game, and you could see mom and dad walking through. Junior is excited and almost uncontrollable. He's so excited to be going to his first game, even though it's raining. He doesn't care because it's Fenway Park. And at the same time, I recall my first vision at Fenway Park. I wasn't a youngster, but I think everyone who has been there, and maybe this is true of just every baseball park, you walk up the stadium stairs, it's like walking through the middle of a unfinished building. There's everything. You can see the vendors, you see people walking, everybody's walking up to their seat. You come out where you can finally see the field, and it just opens up this huge green field, um, and it almost takes your breath away because of the scale, the bright color, uh, the you see the baseball players warming up, you hear the music in the background. All the sensations kind of combine for a really memorable experience. In fact, I can put it on par with learning to ride a bicycle. Everybody remembers that experience. The first time you rode a bicycle, what kind of experience, what kind of sensation that generates, and you remember it for the rest of your life. And seeing the open baseball field when you climb those stairs is very similar. I can remember the first time I saw it, and I can remember the first time that I watched a game here. Anyway, Junior's excited about that. There's been a lot of talk during the week about going to watch the baseball game, and finally they're there. So he's got his arms outstretched, and mom and dad are excited too. So this painting perhaps has a stronger narrative than a lot of work that we've done. I don't I don't hesitate to embrace that. I like when we play on human stories, and especially um, happy ones like this. I feel that I enjoy that aspect of our shared experience, and if I can put that into a painting, I enjoy that part of it. So this naturally seems to happen when working with figures. Is the narrative comes out, and past experiences from um, memories of going to a baseball game or walking down a rainy street or seeing a family have an interaction all come back to me, and this is something that I build on. So I'm starting to strategize about the reflections, which I'm going to do next. I'll need to wet the paper to get this started, but this will be the next stage, is building in the reflections of our main subject. Well, the paper's dried off, and I'm coming back into this with uh, my big mop brush, re-wetting the area. You notice how pale it's dried. I want to build up the graded wash a little darker. That's how I'm starting. And I start with just that plain water just below the crosswalk, coming down to the bottom of the page. Mix up some strong dark and start to apply that. And right away it looks better. If it dried like this, I'd be happy. But it's going to continue to pale. So um, now I want to start to uh, restate the darks under the uh, canopies, or under the just below the Flask and Kagan pub. Build those up at the same time. So I'm using a smaller brush, a little extra dark, and building up that dark reflection once more, bringing a little more drama to the foreground. and watching how it moves. That's an important part of creating these graded washes, is taking note of how the color is moving. If it moves too fast, that means it's going to dry very, very light, and you probably want to return with a darker color. If it moves too slow, if it doesn't move at all, you might want to take your spray bottle and hit it with the spray bottle a little bit and get it started. My table, my paper angle, as you know, is on quite an incline, so I get some instant feedback right away. Is this wash moving as fast as I think it should? To me, it looks good, the resulting darks right now, but I have a feeling that I might need to state it once more. We'll see as this dries off. But I like the drama that it's creating. And this is basically the result of the media. Watercolors doing all of this for me. All I have to do is sit back and watch. Well, look at the image itself. Figures are having the sort of effect that we want. They're moving about. We feel a lot of figures in the distance, and we feel our main figures are moving through the scene in a positive way. You see me now putting up one of the gas lights, the old gas lights that we see all around Boston. They're no longer working as gas lights, but they serve as street markers, or they illuminate at night, and they give sort of a historic quality to the city of Boston. So there is one right on this corner with the street signs. I'm going to put that because it's another way to indicate where we are, and do it in a fashion that doesn't intrude on the scene, but rather, gives us another suggestion of the surroundings. And also it pushes back against the stadium a little bit, which always works out well. Kind of biding time by making some adjustments to the figures walking under the awnings. What I'm doing is just waiting for the right moment to add reflections to my figures on the right hand side. There's some touch-up work that I can do on the on the pub, on Cask and Flagon Pub. And that's what I'm doing now, is starting to hide some of those darks and waiting for the right time to move into the figures themselves and start to place their reflections. And just like when we are building the smaller characters on our study, we can play with these silhouettes now, maybe give them a little bit of clothing or a little bit of nuance, a hat, a bag. And I'm starting to build in the reflections. The paper's dry enough that I can get nice hard edges for the reflections. These could also be painted in the manner that we painted the Cask and Flagon, a soft reflection, but I'm using a harder edge reflection in this case to, I guess, draw attention to the area a little more. Basically starting it off with long verticals, which represent the reflections of legs, and then as I finish this shape, you see that I'm kind of joining the reflected shapes as well. And these reflected shapes are connecting nicely to the graded wash below, which visually is a good thing because we get a nice well, we get some unity in this mid-tone by letting the reflections connect in this manner. We can paint shadows in the same way. The main difference with shadows and reflections is that their orientation. Um, the shadow's orientation, its angle, its placement is always determined by the sun, the source of light, whereas the reflection is always determined by sort of the viewer's proximity, where we're standing related to the object, and it comes straight towards us. The reflection comes straight towards us. So if we move, the reflection moves. In any case, in these sorts of graphical terms, we don't have to be too precise about that. In fact, I would rather be guided by the interesting shape than anything else. And that's why I'm exaggerating the length of this shape. I'm exaggerating the quality, the bulkiness of the shape, the size of the shape. I'm exaggerating those qualities because more than anything else, I want it to be a beautiful shape. We'll understand it's a reflection. If it's shorter, if it's longer, if it's lighter, darker, we'll understand it's a reflection. But I want it to make a strong impression with the shape. And so that's why I want to use harder edges and paint it in sort of a dramatic fashion. In fact, these reflections are about a third longer than the subject casting the reflections. That gives it a little bit of added drama. As I'm painting this, I realize it's probably easier to paint from left to right rather than right to left, as sometimes I want to rest my hand, but I can't because the area underneath is all wet. So don't make my mistake. Paint it in a way that's going to work out ergonomically the best. And now we can start to see, well, that idea of the rainy day pavement is quite strong, isn't it? We're getting that sensation that it's either raining or it's just rained and everything is shiny because it's wet, and for that reason those reflections have that sort of power that we want. Well, what you see me doing now is just adding some nuances to the figures. I'm adding some clothing, some little accents. Baseball hats are great. I use them a lot in painting because you can really indicate the tip of the head. There's a lot that you can do in terms of motion and directing the gaze with the bill of the baseball hat. And that's what you see me working on now, is just the final touches. Anything else that I add at this point will be minimal because the image has got that feeling of unity and it's got that feeling of finality. Now, as it dries, there may be something more that I want to touch up. I realized that I want to include one more stadium light. There's a column that's closer to us, and I thought it would be a good idea to include that as well, using dry brush. But this is probably the time when you want to think about economy more than anything else, is how can you do more with less. Some white highlights could be good in the figures, just to give us that added quality that, well, perhaps their shoulders are a little wet and they're reflecting light as well. So I'm going through my little checklist to see if these things will look good. I do want to wait for the figures to dry because I want the white to be on dry paper. And I think that's the next thing, is to make these small adjustments, then step away from the painting, see how it looks, and return to with any sort of accents. Even though we're just using a single color, to me it's very satisfying. I don't miss colors in this stage. My mind is thinking about what if we had, some red shirts or a red sign in our cask and flagon and reflecting that. It could be an interesting color combination, right? Mostly in these subdued tones with a few appearances of the red color. Could be quite interesting. I'm also thinking about what it would be like, going to a night game and seeing the stadium illuminated like this if we just had a very dark silhouette. And so I'm getting all these little, and my mind is wandering a little bit and thinking about the next painting already and how I might incorporate what I've learned in this image and what I can use from this image in the next painting, whether it be color or black and white.